Chapter 1. The Phantom Signal. The Corellian patrol ship Azari moved through the cold silence of the outer expanse, a region of space that had long been considered nothing more than a graveyard of dead civilizations. Once, thousands of years ago, the expanse had been filled with life-flourishing empires, bustling trade routes, and great fleets that had carved out the fabric of the cosmos itself. But war had come, as it always did. Some called it the Great Collapse, others simply referred to it as the end of the Age of Titans. Whatever the name, the result had been the same. Entire species vanished. Entire systems were left abandoned. The few survivors of the old wars fled to safer regions of the galaxy, leaving behind only ruins, broken worlds, and myths. And one of the greatest myths of all was humans. Captain Cellari Vane had never believed in myths. She was a realist, a scientist first and a soldier second. Like all Corellians, she had been raised to rely on logic, data, and observable truths. The old stories about humans were nothing more than that, stories. Tales whispered by spacers in deep space taverns, legends told to younglings to scare them into behaving. Humans had supposedly been a warrior race, unmatched in their ingenuity, terrifying in their adaptability, feared across the stars for their ferocity and determination. They had been described as monsters, as conquerors, as the harbingers of both war and salvation. But they weren't real. Every serious scientist, every historian, every recorded archive agreed on one thing: humans had never existed. They were an exaggeration, a fabrication created from the fractured memories of a time long past. There had been powerful species once, civilizations that had waged war against the Corellians and others, but the idea that a single species, a single empire of beings called humans, had risen, fought, and then disappeared completely was ludicrous. There was no proof. There was no evidence. Which is why, when her radar officer paled and whispered the impossible, Cellari felt something shift inside her. "Captain." The voice of Talus Arrow, her most trusted sensor analyst, shook with uncertainty. I'm picking up a ship, but it's impossible." Cellari's golden eyes narrowed, her four pupils adjusting as she flicked her hand across her holographic interface, bringing up the incoming data. "Clarify," she ordered, her voice calm but firm. "What do you mean by impossible?" Talus hesitated, then tapped a control, sending the information directly to her command console. "Look for yourself, Captain," he said. Cellari did. And then her breath caught in her throat. The screen displayed a ship, far beyond the outer perimeter of their patrol route, drifting near the edges of the Argoni Nebula, where light bent and scattered in ways that made long-range scans difficult. At first glance, it appeared old, its hull bearing scars of battle, its design unlike anything she had ever encountered. But that wasn't what sent ice through her veins. It was the energy signature. It was unlike anything in the Corellian database. Unfamiliar, ancient, raw. And yet, "This can't be right," Cellari whispered. She tapped the controls, running a secondary diagnostic, confirming the results. The readings remained unchanged. Her hands clenched into fists. The ship's power source matched the ancient records, the theoretical blueprints of a species that should not exist. The ship was human. Silence fell across the bridge. No one spoke. No one moved. Talus's voice broke the stillness. "Captain, what are your orders?" Cellari barely heard him. Her mind raced, processing what she was seeing, trying to fit it into the world of logic she had always known. The ship was impossible. And yet, it was real. For a moment, she considered dismissing it, assuming it was a glitch, some sort of sensor malfunction, but she knew better. The Azari was equipped with the most advanced scanning systems in the fleet. If it was picking up this, it was because it was there. She took a slow, steadying breath. "We move in closer," she said at last. "Talus, maintain sensor lock, but do not engage active scans. I don't want whatever is on that ship to know we're watching it." Talus nodded. "Understood, Captain." Cellari turned to her helmsman, Commander Ryan Evo, whose expression mirrored the disbelief written across the faces of the entire crew. "Helm, bring us within 500 clicks. Keep our emissions low. I want to see it with my own eyes." "Aye, Captain," Ryan said, his voice tight with tension. The Azari moved through the void, silent and calculated, its engines pulsing with quiet energy as it closed the distance. The closer they got, the more real it became. Cellari leaned forward, her breath catching as the ship came into full view. It was massive, not a battleship, not a dreadnought, but something else entirely. It had a rough, angular design, nothing like the smooth, organic curves of Corellian engineering. Its hull was scarred, bearing the marks of weapons fire, of battles fought long ago. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't elegant. But it was terrifying. Because it wasn't just floating. It was powering up. "Captain!" Talus's voice broke through the silence, this time filled with urgency. "The ship, its systems are activating. Its weapons are coming online." Solari's heart pounded. For thousands of years, humans had been nothing more than a ghost story, a legend. But now they were waking up, and the galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 2. The Ghost of a Forgotten War. The Azari drifted toward the massive, unknown ship like a silent predator in the void, its engines barely emitting enough energy to register on a standard scan. Every crew member on board held their breath, watching as the impossible vessel began to wake from its ancient slumber. It was no mere derelict, no relic left to rot in the black. It had power. It had life. Captain Solari Vane stood rigid at the command deck, her 4 golden eyes locked onto the data streaming across the holographic displays. The ship was human. It had to be. There was no other explanation for its design, for the raw, brutal efficiency of its hull, the thick armor plating that looked layered with history, scarred from a war long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. For so long, humans had been nothing more than a myth, a story whispered in the corridors of deep space stations, a name spoken with both awe and deep-rooted fear. And yet, here was proof. Floating before her was something impossible, a vessel from a species that was never supposed to have existed. And now, it was awakening. "Captain, the energy readings are spiking." Talus Arrow's voice shook with something between fear and fascination as he monitored the sensor data. "That ship hit's bringing its primary power core online. It's not just running on emergency systems anymore. Something or someone is inside, restoring it." Solari clenched her fists, her mind racing. If someone was inside that ship, if humans were still alive, then everything the galaxy thought it knew was wrong. "Do we have a visual yet?" she asked, her voice sharp but measured. Her helmsman, Ryan Evo, tapped at his controls, his fingers moving with the careful precision of someone who knew one wrong move could spell disaster. A moment later, the holoscreen above the command deck flickered to life, displaying a live camera feed of the ship. The first thing Solari noticed was the insignia. It was faded, barely visible against the blackened hull, but it was still there. A mark that had been burned into history before history itself had been rewritten. A sigil of a long-extinct empire. The Terran Dominion. Solari's breath caught. It was real. Humans were real. And their ship, their warship, was still alive. "Send a message," she ordered, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Solari Vane of the Corellian patrol ship Azari. You are within the jurisdiction of the Corellian sovereignty. Identify yourself immediately." The bridge was silent as the message was transmitted. The seconds dragged on, the only sound the soft hum of the ship's systems and the distant crackle of static from the communications relay. Then, a response. A single voice. Low, rough, human. "Corellian vessel. This is the TSV Revenant. State your purpose." The bridge crew stared at their consoles in disbelief. Solari's fingers twitched, barely able to process what she had just heard. It was impossible. That ship should not have been able to speak. It should not have had anyone on board. The Dominion had been wiped out, erased from existence thousands of years ago. And yet, here was a voice from the past. A voice that should not exist. "Confirm transmission," she barked, forcing herself to remain calm. Talus nodded hurriedly. "It's real, Captain. The signal is coming directly from the vessel. There's someone inside." Solari exhaled sharply, her mind racing with possibilities. If this was real, if there was a human on board, then the implications were terrifying. The Corellians had always considered themselves among the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. But compared to the lost species of legend, compared to humans, they were nothing more than children playing with fire. The old stories flooded back to her mind. The myths of human technology, of their unbreakable warships, of the war machines that could rip apart entire planets. The legends spoke of weapons that no other species could comprehend, strategies that no other empire could counter. And now, She was looking directly at one of them. She turned to her crew. Maintain position. Do not engage weapons. We are not here to provoke a fight. Her fingers hovered over the command panel before she pressed the transmission key again. Revenant, she said carefully, your ship matches the energy signatures of a pre-collapse human warship. That should be impossible. How are you still operational? Silence. Then, a slow, deep chuckle came through the speakers. So, you really don't know, do you? Cellari felt something cold crawl down her spine. Know what? She asked carefully. The voice on the other end sighed. That the war never ended. The bridge went dead silent. Cellari's pulse pounded in her ears as her mind struggled to process those words. The war, the one that had supposedly ended thousands of years ago, was still ongoing? That was impossible. The last records of the human empire had been erased, their colonies abandoned, their fleets vanished without a trace. The Corellians had always assumed they had destroyed themselves, that their war had reached a point where no one had survived. But this man, this human, was saying otherwise. Cellari took a breath, forcing herself to remain composed. Explain, she demanded. The voice on the other end was grim. You've been living in the ruins of a war you never understood. You think your people inherited the galaxy. You think the expanse is just empty space, a dead region with nothing left to find. But you're wrong. We never lost. We were never destroyed. We were waiting. Cellari's hands clenched at her sides. Waiting for what? We buried ourselves beneath the stars, the voice continued. We let the rest of you believe we were gone. But we were never gone. We were rebuilding, preparing, watching. Cellari's throat felt dry. The Corellians had ruled the outer expanse for generations. If humans had been hiding this entire time, then that meant they had been here all along. A terrifying thought struck her. If humans had survived, if they had been waiting, then what were they waiting for? The answer came before she could even ask. The human on the other end of the transmission let out a slow breath. And now, he said, we're ready to take it all back. The transmission cut off, and then the Revenant's engines roared to life. Cellari barely had time to react before the human warship began to move. Her blood went cold. The myths weren't just real. They were waking up, and the galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 3. The Sleeping Giant Stirs. The Revenant moved like a beast waking from slumber, its massive frame shifting through the void with deliberate, terrifying grace. The hull, ancient yet untouched by time, carried scars of battles fought in an era long forgotten, each mark a silent testament to wars that had shaped the very foundation of the galaxy. Its engines, dormant for what must have been centuries, now roared to life with a deep, guttural pulse, sending shockwaves through the vacuum, making the very stars around it tremble. The Azari held position, its crew frozen in place, their screens flooded with impossible readings, their minds unable to fully grasp the enormity of what they were witnessing. Cellari Vane had always prided herself on her composure, her ability to remain in control no matter how unexpected the situation. But as she watched the human warship fully awaken before her, as she felt the power radiating from its frame like the breath of an ancient predator, she realized for the first time in her life that she was standing at the precipice of something far greater than she had ever prepared for. She had studied the legends, had read the old reports, had dismissed the myths as nothing more than spacer folklore. But now the myths were rising from their graves, wrapped in steel and fire. And the man, the human on the other end of the transmission, had made one thing very clear. The war had never ended. Captain, Talus Arrow's voice cut through the silence, shaky but focused, his 4 hands running across his console as he processed the flood of incoming data. The Revenant systems are fully active. Energy readings are spiking across the board. Whatever it was before, it's now at full combat readiness. His golden eyes flicked up to meet hers, his usually confident expression marred by a deep, unsettled dread. Captain, that ship is preparing for engagement. Cellari exhaled slowly, forcing her mind to sharpen, to pull away from the sheer enormity of what she was facing and focus on what needed to be done. The Azari was a reconnaissance ship, lightly armored, built for speed and stealth. It was not designed to engage in battle, and if the legends were true, if even a fraction of the old stories about human warships were accurate, then this single vessel could obliterate them in moments. Helm, keep us at minimum thrust. No sudden movements, she ordered. her voice steady despite the weight pressing against her chest. Talus, maintain passive scans only. I don't want them thinking we're trying to lock weapons on them. She turned toward communications. Open a line again. A sharp click followed, and the link re-established. For a moment, all she could hear was the faint hum of the Revenant systems, the deep thrum of energy flowing through its ancient circuits. And then the voice returned, steady, calm, but carrying an edge that sent an instinctual shiver down her spine. You're still here, the human said. That's surprising. Most would have run by now. Cellari refused to let the weight of his words shake her. I don't run from things I don't understand, she replied, her fingers tightening around the edges of her console. But you haven't answered my question. What do you mean? The war never ended. The records, the archives, everything states that the Dominion collapsed thousands of cycles ago. That humanity vanished. A long pause followed, then a quiet, humorless chuckle. That's what they told you, the human said. That's what they wanted you to believe. That we just disappeared. There was something in his tone now, something dark and sharp, a bitterness that seemed carved into the very core of his being. You have no idea, do you? How much they erased, how much they buried. You all think you inherited the galaxy after we were gone, but we were never gone. We were watching, waiting. Solari's throat went dry. Waiting for what? She asked. The human's response was slow, deliberate, each word heavy with a weight she couldn't yet fully understand. For the right time to come back. Silence stretched between them, a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed against every soul aboard the Azari. Cellari could feel the tension rippling through her crew, the unspoken fear, the knowledge that they had stumbled upon something far bigger than themselves. For generations, the Corellians had believed they were the dominant force in the outer expanse, that they had risen in the wake of the collapse, unchallenged rulers of the remnants of a shattered era. But now they stood at the edge of a truth too large to ignore. Cellari forced herself to stay composed. Are you claiming that humans have been hiding in the expanse this entire time? That the Dominion still exists? Another pause. No, the human admitted. The Dominion is gone. What remains of us? Isn't the empire that once was? We are fewer than we were before. But we are still here. Cellari exhaled, her mind processing the implications. If even a fraction of what he was saying was true, then the Corellian government, the sovereignty, had no idea what they had been living alongside all this time. You said the war never ended, she pressed, her voice firm. What war? The archives state that the collapse wiped out multiple civilizations, that the conflicts of that era were mutually destructive. Are you saying that's a lie? The human's voice came back quieter this time. The collapse wasn't a war between empires, he said. It was a war against something else. Cellari's fingers froze over her console. Something else? What are you talking about? A quiet hum filtered through the transmission. You think your people are the rulers of this part of space. You think the expanse is empty, dead, abandoned. But you don't understand. There's a reason we never revealed ourselves. There's a reason we waited. The lights flickered across the Azari, the ship's secondary sensors suddenly registering an external anomaly. Talus swore under his breath. Captain, new contacts. Multiple. His golden eyes snapped to hers, his voice now carrying an edge of true panic. They just appeared. No FDL signatures. No warning. Cellari turned sharply to the holoscreen as new blips began populating the sector map. Dozens. Hundreds. Ships that hadn't been there moments ago. Ships that, by all logic, shouldn't exist. A cold wave of realization slammed into her. The human's voice came through the comms again, quieter now. You were never the rulers of this place, he murmured. You just thought you were because the real enemy wasn't looking at you. Cellari's breath caught in her throat, and then she saw them. The unknown fleet moved into visual range, dark, jagged vessels unlike anything in the Corellian database. Their hulls twisted and flickered like living shadows, their engines burning with an eerie, sickly green light. They moved with impossible precision, not like piloted ships, but like something that had existed long before piloting had ever been conceived. Talus's voice broke through the rising horror. Captain, these readings, these ships dash, he turned to her, eyes wide with something close to dread. I've seen fragments of this design before. in the deepest levels of the archives. These matched the descriptions of the entities responsible for the collapse. Solari's skin went cold. It wasn't a human war that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. It had been something else entirely. And now it had come back. The last transmission from the Revenant came through, the human's voice calm but firm. "Now do you understand?" he asked. The enemy had returned, and the war that had never ended was about to begin again. Chapter 4. A Reckoning in Blood. The darkness inside Rivik Torsen's penthouse was absolute, thick, suffocating, wrapping the room in silence as if the very walls were holding their breath. The only light came from the emergency glow strips flickering weakly along the base of the walls, barely illuminating the ornate furnishings and high-end technology that lined the chamber. It was a place meant for comfort, for power, for control. But tonight, it was a prison, and Rivik was trapped inside it. Jonas could feel the tension vibrating through the air like an exposed electrical wire, raw and unstable. The Black Maw enforcers were good, trained professionals who had spent years enforcing the Syndicate's rule through violence and fear, but even they weren't prepared for this. Their cybernetic enhancements, their high-end security, their expensive tech all useless. Because none of it worked in the dark. And that was exactly where Jonas and Syria wanted them. Jonas moved like a shadow, his steps silent, his pistol raised as he slipped through the chaos. The Black Maw guards were fumbling, their optics failing, their augments scrambled by the EMP charge he had detonated moments ago. A single pulse of controlled energy had fried every electronic in the penthouse. The playing field was level now. No cameras, no alarms, no reinforcements. Jonas caught movement to his right, a guard trying to reset his targeting systems, his mechanical fingers twitching as he struggled to bring his weapon to bear. Jonas didn't hesitate. A whisper of plasma fire. A single shot. The enforcer crumpled, a smoking hole in his throat, his body thudding to the marble floor. No screams. No alarms. Just the quiet, choking sound of a dying man. Jonas kept moving. Syria was already ahead of him, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the low light, her blade flashing as she danced between the guards. She moved like she had been born for this, each strike precise, surgical, merciless. The first man never saw her coming. The second barely had time to scream before she was behind him, her knife carving a deep crimson smile across his throat. By the time the third had realized what was happening, she was already gone. Jonas had seen warriors before, had fought alongside soldiers and mercenaries across the galaxy, but this was different. Syria wasn't fighting like a trained assassin. She was fighting like someone who had already died once and refused to die again. Jonas took a breath, steadying himself as they reached the massive double doors at the end of the hall, the entrance to Rivik's personal chambers. The last barrier between them and the man who had ordered her death. Jonas turned to Syria. She was covered in blood, her hands slick with it, her breathing ragged but steady. She had never looked stronger. "You ready?" he asked. Syria wiped her blade against her sleeve, then looked up at him. "Yes." Jonas nodded, raised his boot, and kicked the doors open. The penthouse's main chamber was a vision of decadence and arrogance, a place built by a man who believed he could never be touched. Massive glass windows lined the far wall, offering a view of the city below, a kingdom of neon and steel, all of it ruled through fear and blood. At the center of it all, standing beside his expensive, handcrafted desk, was Rivik Torsen, the Syndicate Lord, the man who had bought and sold Syria like she was nothing more than a commodity. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his cybernetic arm gleaming under the emergency lights, his dark coat lined with gold, a symbol of the wealth he had stolen, the lives he had destroyed. His yellow cybernetic eyes locked onto them, scanning, calculating, and for the first time in his life uncertain. Jonas could see it. The fear. The realization that, for once, he was not in control. "You've made a mistake," Rivik said, his voice calm, measured. "You think this changes anything?" Syria stepped forward, slow, deliberate, her blade still dripping warm blood onto the marble floor. "It changes everything," she said. Rivik smirked, though there was a hint of unease in his expression. "You think killing me will make you free?" He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "The Black Maw is bigger than me. I die, someone else takes my place. You'll still be hunted. You'll still be Dash. Syria lunged. She moved so fast Jonas barely had time to react. One moment, Rivik was speaking. The next her blade was buried in his side. The Syndicate Lord gasped, his body jerking, his mechanical arm twitching as blood spilled from the wound. Syria leaned in close, her silver eyes cold and merciless. Then I'll kill them too, she whispered. Rivik tried to swing at her, his cybernetic limb powering up, the built-in plasma cannon whining as it prepared to fire. But Jonas had already moved. His pistol flashed. The plasma round struck Rivik in the shoulder, blowing apart wires and metal, sending the massive man stumbling back against his desk, his damaged limbs sparking uselessly. Syria didn't hesitate. She drove her knife into his chest, twisted it, and ripped it free. Rivik Torsin, Syndicate Lord of the Black Maw, collapsed to the ground, gasping, his blood pooling around him. Syria stared down at him, her expression unreadable. Jonas watched as she knelt beside him, as she pressed her blade to his throat, and as Rivik choked on his final breaths, Syria spoke softly. You thought I was nothing, she said. She cut. And the Black Maw's rule ended with a whisper. They burned everything. The Syndicate's records, its weapons, its wealth, all of it went up in flames as Jonas and Syria walked away, their bodies covered in soot and blood, their faces marked with the weight of what they had done. By the time the Black Maw enforcers realized what had happened, by the time they tried to retaliate, Jonas and Syria were already gone. The Horizon's Edge was waiting for them at the docks, its engines humming like a heartbeat, its cargo hold stocked with enough stolen Syndicate credits to last a lifetime. Syria stood at the bottom of the ramp, staring at the ship, her hands clenching at her sides. You coming? Jonas asked. She looked at him, really looked at him, then exhaled. And for the first time in a long, long time, she smiled. Yes. Jonas grinned. Good. Because I could use a co-pilot. Syria let out a breath, almost a laugh before following him up the ramp. And as the ship lifted off, leaving Tezhari Prime behind, she knew. She wasn't lost anymore. She had a future again. And for the first time in a long, long while, she was free.